They told you it was just a grocery run, just a cabin in the woods, just an entitled woman with too much time on her hands. But what if I told you it wasn't about groceries at all? What if I told you it was never about the food? It was about control. There are places in America where power doesn't wear a uniform, doesn't carry a badge, but controls every inch of your life. Neighborhoods ruled not by law, but by the illusion of law. Hidden councils, whispered bylaws, and names you never voted for. Yet who can determine whether you belong or whether you disappear? Jake Morrison wasn't just unloading eggs and coffee that morning. He was crossing an invisible line, a boundary drawn not in ink, but in bloodline, color, status. His family cabin at Clearwater Lake was supposed to be a refuge, a sacred place left behind by his grandparents, untouched by the chaos of modern life. But the moment he returned, it felt wrong. The kind of wrong you can't name, the kind that watches you from porches, that measures your bags and your skin color with equal scrutiny. The first sign was her eyes, Patricia's, pale, glassy, hungry, the eyes of a predator who believes her dominion is absolute, not just over lawns and fences, but over truth itself. She didn't see Jake as a neighbor. She saw him as a variable, a problem, an outsider that disrupted her version of reality, a version she had meticulously constructed through the years of intimidation, fear, and a weaponized rulebook. So when she accused Jake of stealing his own groceries, it wasn't a mistake. It was protocol. The HOA wasn't created to build community. It was built to control who gets to have a community. It was never about aesthetics. It was about psychological submission. If they can control your parking, your barbecue, your kayak, they can control you. And for men like Jake, who refuse to kneel, the system doesn't ask questions. It calls the cops. The game was never fair, but now, Jake had just flipped the board, and what lay beneath wasn't suburban peace. It was institutional rot. Most men think freedom means owning land, signing a deed, having a place to call your own. But they never read the fine print. Jake did everything right, by the book. He inherited the cabin, paid the taxes, filed the ownership transfer. He followed the rules of the law. But in Clearwater Lake, there was another law. One you don't find in courthouses, only in whispers at board meetings and HOA newsletters printed on ivory paper. This law doesn't care about deeds. It cares about dominance. Because behind every pristine lawn in Pine Ridge is a hidden constitution, not written by the people, not approved by any vote, but enforced with more precision than any sheriff's badge. And Patricia? She wasn't just the HOA president. She was the high priestess of a suburban cult built on fear, subtle racism, and the sacred ritual of compliance. It wasn't groceries that threatened her. It was autonomy. A man like Jake, mixed race, independent, refusing to beg for permission, he disrupted the illusion she had cast over the neighborhood. She used code enforcement like shackles, noise violations like gags, parking notices like chains, and when that failed, she summoned her final weapon, the narrative. You see, the most powerful tool of the ruling class isn't a law, it's a story. Patricia didn't accuse Jake of theft because she believed it. She did it because the story would be believed. She knew what the cops would see, a man who didn't look like he belonged, bags of food that looked like loot, skin tone that looked suspicious. It wasn't about what Jake did, it was about what he represented. Because when the system can turn your identity into evidence, you're not living in a neighborhood anymore. You're living in a psychological experiment. And here's the part they never want you to learn. HOAs were never just about homes. They were born from redlining, developed as tools to segregate without saying the word. They've evolved now, more polished, more polite, but the core remains the same: obey or be erased. Jake didn't just threaten Patricia's authority, he threatened the machinery that let her believe she had the right to define reality. But she forgot something. When a man has nothing left to lose but his truth, you can't control him. You can only try to silence him. Comment below. They use the rules to hide the chains. Say it twice. You'll never see homeownership the same again. You have to understand, what Patricia did next wasn't personal. It was ritual. When systems of control begin to fail, they don't retreat quietly. They escalate. They humiliate. Because in authoritarian psychology, destruction is a form of order. And to Patricia, Jake wasn't just a threat, he was a virus in her controlled environment. So she did what all gatekeepers of dying power do. She tried to publicly break him. The false 911 call wasn't a mistake. It was precision warfare. She knew the timing. Wait until the fourth trip from the car. Let the bags stack up. Catch him off guard. Eggs in one hand. Receipts still buried in the glove box. Then dial. And when the cruisers pulled up, when the uniforms stepped onto that gravel driveway, Patricia didn't look afraid. She looked triumphant. Because humiliation is a ceremony in these places. A reminder to everyone watching from their windows, this is what happens when you don't play by the unspoken rules. It didn't matter that Jake owned the cabin. It didn't matter that he had receipts. All that mattered was the performance. The optics. The whisper it sent rippling through the trees. He doesn't belong. Because once someone plants that seed, the system waters it for them. That's the true horror of institutional manipulation. It doesn't need facts. Just fear. And when the cops realized the truth, that nothing was stolen, that Jake had every right to be there, it should have ended. But that's not how dark power works. Patricia didn't back down. She doubled down. She filed charges through the HOA, accused Jake of operating an unauthorized business, hosting illegal gatherings, attracting wildlife, terms designed to sound petty, but carefully chosen to trigger compliance clauses. Because the goal was never justice. It was exile. And here's what you weren't supposed to know. Many HOAs use this exact tactic. Weaponize. What Patricia didn't understand, what the system never understands, is that some men are born remembering. Not with their minds, but with their blood. Jake Morrison had ancestors who'd survived far worse than HOA summons and suburban show trials. His grandmother, the one who left him that cabin, taught him that land wasn't just property, it was protection and history. History was written not in books, but in scars. And now, that history was awake. The moment Jake called his cousin Sarah, the real estate attorney with a steel spine and a soul full of ancestral fire, the game shifted. Because every paper trail Patricia thought would bury Jake became an archive of her crimes. Sarah uncovered what Pine Ridge tried to forget. 17 false police reports, all aimed at homeowners who didn't fit. Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay her brother-in-law's security firm, fraud disguised as community safety. She'd created rules without votes, fined families into submission, driven elders from their homes like it was 1963 all over again. And the worst part? Everyone knew. They just hadn't dared to speak. Until Jake knocked on their doors, not as a victim, but as a witness. He didn't ask for pity. He asked for truth, and one by one they gave it. Tom, 3 cabins down, with the video footage. Maria, with the receipts for the fines. Even the Washingtons, elderly, weary, exiled, wrote their testimony. Because something was changing. This wasn't just about groceries anymore. It was about reclaiming reality. HOAs were supposed to keep neighborhoods clean. Instead, they became sanctuaries for control freaks, micro-tyrants, and legacy racism repackaged as policy. Behind their smiles were fear-based hierarchies, shaming rituals, and kangaroo courts built to gaslight and dominate. But men like Jake, they are mirrors the system cannot look into. Because he didn't just remember. The boardroom was designed for silence. Muted carpet, beige walls, a long table meant to intimidate, to create the illusion of order. Patricia sat at the head, pearls, pressed suit, clipboard in hand, confident that the pageantry of power would protect her. But this time, the ritual was broken. Jake entered not as a defendant, but as a witness to corruption. Behind him stood neighbors who had once whispered in fear, now shoulder to shoulder. Tom, Maria, the Washington's letter in his hands like scripture. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Because when truth walks into a room that's only known performance, it doesn't shout. It rearranges gravity. He started with the footage. Patricia filming him, calling him suspicious, spitting racial undertones like venom. The board stiffened, eyes darted. She shifted in her chair, the first crack. Then came the police report, filed with false claims, disproven within minutes. The officer's apology, the receipts, cold, precise, undeniable. But Jake wasn't done. Slide after slide, false reports, falsified fines, HOA funds funneled into her brother-in-law's pocket. A map of power abused and masked with professionalism. And then, the faces. The people she'd driven out. one by one. That's when the air-shifted power doesn't dissolve, it transfers. And in that moment, Patricia felt it slipping from her palms like sand. The room no longer feared her. They saw her, not as a protector, but as a parasite. She tried to speak, of course. This is a witch hunt, a smear campaign. I'm the only one who ever tried to keep this community safe. But it was too late. Robert, the elder board member, looked her dead in the eye. Patricia, you weaponized your role, and you put all of us at legal risk. We're not shielding you. Vote. Unanimous, effective immediately, suspended, barred from all HOA communication, full audit approved. 3 months passed. The silence around Clearwater Lake was different now, not the cold silence of fear, but the deep, sacred quiet that follows a storm. Patricia Hawthorne was gone, indicted, convicted, stripped not just of her title, but of her illusion. The audit revealed everything. $32,000 embezzled, 17 fraudulent reports, dozens of manipulated votes. HOA rules passed illegally and used like weapons in a war against the unwanted. Jake stood at the sentencing hearing. He didn't speak as a victim. He spoke as a witness to awakening. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Miss Hawthorne, you used power not to serve, but to dominate. You buried fear inside paperwork. You hid malice inside policy. But justice doesn't forget. Not forever. 3 years in prison. Restitution. Public disgrace. But for Jake, the true sentence had already been served, not by Patricia, but by the system that made her possible. And that's the truth no one wants to say out loud. She wasn't the disease. She was the symptom. HOAs, neighborhood councils, architectural review boards, all wrapped in the language of safety and order, but infected with something older, darker. Control. You think it ends at the mailbox, but it doesn't. You think it's about grass height and fence paint, but it's always been about who gets to exist. Without permission. Jake didn't just take back his land. He reclaimed something far more dangerous, narrative. Because once a man reclaims the power to name what's real, to say, this is mine, not because of a paper deed, but because of blood, memory, and will, no institution can hold him. And when Jake sat back on that old porch weeks later, watching the lake ripple in the morning sun, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt aware. He saw how easily fear had been disguised as policy, how silence had been mistaken for peace, and how many,